I had an Aaron Rodgers moment yesterday. So what is an Aaron Rodgers moment? So I think that we all know the story of Aaron Rodgers, and especially if you watch Hard Knocks, because the entire summer, as the New York Jets were preparing to enter into their season, Aaron Rodgers left his team that he had been with for many, many years, and he embarked upon the attempt to gain a Super Bowl championship for a team that historically does not get them. Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL, four-time MVP winner. And if you watched Hard Knocks, which goes into the training camp and follows them through the summer as they prepare, I think everybody gained an admiration for Aaron Rodgers. The hard work that he put into it and the leadership that he exhibited, and everybody had high hopes, even if you're a New York Jets fan, that maybe this was going to be the year. But then you'll remember that the big moment was Monday night when, on Monday Night Football, 4 plays into his career, he tore his Achilles tendon. And he's out for the rest of the year. And I think that everybody who followed his story had that sense of frustration and aching for Aaron and all the work and efforts that he put into his goal of, as a senior citizen, doing well, right? He's like 38, 39. But he was hoping to really pull this team up by the bootstraps. And so when he went down with an Achilles tendon tear on the 4th play, everybody said, oh my goodness, all that work and effort, and now it is wasted. So what was my Aaron Rodgers moment? It was yesterday when I woke up in the morning and my mouth was on fire. I had such a pain in a tooth that it seemed to affect the entire right side of my mouth. And I lay there in bed in terrible pain. And I said, I cannot conduct services this weekend feeling this way. And it was a misery that no amount of medication was helping. And so I finally was able to find a doctor who was able, a dentist who was able to see me at 3 o'clock yesterday. And he was out in Thousand Oaks, because now that I'm on Medicare, it's a whole different Delta dental plan. And they don't have very many dentists who accept Delta Dental from Kaiser. But I found one in Thousand Oaks, and I went, and he checked me out, and he said, you cracked your tooth. This is a molar in the back of my mouth. So when you crack that tooth, we're talking about something pretty painful. And I said, take it out, take it out. He said, I'm not that kind of dentist. I only do root canals. I don't know how to take a tooth out. I said, I'm conducting services this week. I didn't actually tell him this. This is going through my mind. I don't want dentists to start to feel, hey, he's a rabbi, I'll take his tooth out, whether I know how to do it or not. He's an important guy. So instead, I said, it's got to be done. I am in misery. So he said, well, let me see if I can find a friend of mine who does this in the area. And he did. He was able to find somebody. And at 4 o'clock, I was able to get into that dentist's office, and he yanked my tooth and sent me home. And I was pain-free. The pain was absolutely left my face. And I thought, I'm heading into the weekend, I can conduct all of my service. Of course, that was until the Novocaine wore off. Then it was painful again. But at least now there was medication that was able to help me, and ibuprofen. Those of you who are wondering what, tapping into the rabbi's medical toolkit, it was ibuprofen, and I'm okay now. I don't know how long that ibuprofen is going to last, so I'm going to tell you that the whole point of the story is, this is the sermon that I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to give you. And it's all about the Torah portion for this Shabbat and for this first day of Rosh Hashanah. And I hope that when we were chanting it up here, that you had an opportunity to read it in your Machzor, your High Holiday Prayer Book, because it's the story that could have been found in the front pages of the LA Times. A woman is unable to conceive, but she wants a child. And so she encourages her husband to use the maid as a surrogate. And remember that artificial insemination was not a thing in those days. You understand what I'm saying to you? There was not, that's why we don't invite children to our services. We sent them all to our Shir Ami service in the back. That's where all those kids were going. We have an auxiliary service there for our preschoolers and stuff. So there was not a protest from her husband. Of course, why would there be? You know. But there was no protest from Abraham, and the baby is born to the maid, and by prior agreement, it's given over to the woman and her husband to raise as their own. The maid continues to work for the couple, but the woman is jealous of the maid and begins to verbally abuse the maid who gave her child to her and her husband. And for whatever reason, the mother now who's looking after the maid's baby, is her own, is abusing the maid, and the maid runs away and is convinced to return. And lo and behold, the woman herself now gets pregnant. And after the birth of the child, the woman realizes that she doesn't need the maid around anymore. She doesn't need her, and she doesn't need her bratty son, and convinces her husband, load him up in the van and drive them out to the middle of the desert and drop them off and come home. Give them maybe a canteen of water. That's it. Just leave them to die. Well, you know what happens, because it was our Torah portion this day. Hagar, the maid, and her son, Ishmael, survive. Why? Because God provides a well for them to drink from. And Sarah and her husband, Abraham, raise her son, Isaac, and all live happily ever after. That was our Torah portion. All are happy, except me. I read the story, and I'm never happy. And it's because I read the story, and I always ask myself this question. Why in the world do we read this story on Rosh Hashanah? We can't find something better? We can't find something more that relates to the theme of the high holidays? This is a Hayom Harat Olam. This is the birthday of creation. Why don't we read something from the creation story? Doesn't that make more sense? This is a terrible story. It's a heartless and inhumane story. It's hard to believe that it's actually our matriarchs and patriarchs who are involved in this. Not only, I think, should it not be read on Rosh Hashanah, it should never be read. How could Sarah do such a thing? She was the one who suggested to Abraham to take the woman, Hagar, as the concubine to perpetuate the name. How could she then be so resentful and so vindictive? And how could Father Abraham listen to her? He knew that they were going to die in the desert. Didn't his conscience bother him? It was his son, the son that Sarah had wanted him to have, Ishmael. And poor Hagar. Our hearts have to go out to her, wandering there with Ishmael, all alone in the desert, subject to the wind and the heat, trembling at the possibility of seeing her child die right in front of her. So the question, I think, has to be asked. Why is this the text to be read on Rosh Hashanah? Surely there are better texts. What are we trying to say by beginning the new year with this story? Well, I think if Hagar were alive today, she could tell us why her story is chosen for this day. Because our lives, your life and my life, is permeated with echoes of Hagar's life. Loneliness, pain, rejection, hurt, anguish. No one wants to acknowledge it, but I think that we'll realize the inherent truth in this story, that we all walk with pain in our lives, just as Hagar did. And that pain is not going to simply go away, even as a joyous new year begins. We deal with so many different kinds of pain in our lives. Sometimes it's a physical pain. Maybe it's the result of an accident or a life-threatening illness. I've been at the hospital with you during the hours of your pain, You were suffering. I could see the hopelessness and the helplessness in your eyes. And I could see it in your face. What will I do? How will I be when or if I leave the hospital? Sometimes the pain isn't physical, but emotional. Bitter nonetheless, just as excruciating. Much pain in our lives comes from our inability to sustain enduring relationships with those we love, husbands and wives. They become adversaries, antagonists, or worse, silent in each other's presence. Sometimes parents and children or adult brothers and sisters, they can't speak with each other in peace for reasons which often fade from memory and from importance as well. I see it each time I officiated a simcha. We all know the difficulties of arranging our families around banquet tables. How can we possibly put Aunt Shirley next to her brother, Uncle Sidney? They haven't spoken to each other in years. How many bar mitzvahs did I used to do and bat mitzvahs did I do in weddings where there is somebody that is hurt because they weren't invited, or they were invited and other people in the family were hurt? How many hours do we waste over these excruciating details? How many times in a family simcha do we see our unfavorite relative walk in and we wonder how are we going to spend the evening avoiding them? It isn't physical pain, and we might laugh about it, but family dysfunction affects all of us, and it hurts. I have a feeling, if I were to ask you, is there anybody in your family who doesn't speak to somebody else in your family? Almost everybody would raise your hand. Some of us carry around pain which results from a death of a loved one or a friend. For some, the pain is from misfortune, personal, physical, or business related. All of us are aging, which in itself is pain producing. All of us have had, by the way, the tooth that cracked, it was almost 80 years old. Okay. You're all thinking, so are mine. Well, some of you are cracking your teeth too. I have a feeling, I see some of you are going through some dental issues as well. But all of us have had hopes and dreams that haven't been materialized, that sometimes our hopes have become nightmares, our aspirations have become unfulfilled, projects have remained undone, words of love are left unsaid, people we love have been ignored, our yearnings have become disappointments, our hopes have turned into despair. Sometimes life just doesn't turn out the way that we want it. The life script that we thought that we would get is just not the life script that we end up living. Just like Hagar, we are perplexed and we are confused and we are saddened and we are in pain. I sometimes hear about students who graduated from this school many, many years ago, and the grief and the suffering that some of them were going through. I just heard a couple of weeks ago of one young woman, 31 years old, just had a baby. She was just diagnosed with a brain tumor. And she says, I don't understand. I'm told I'm going to die from this. And then she wrote something very interesting. She said, the brain tumor that I have is very rare. And so I have a feeling that if it's rare to get it, I'm going to beat the odds even if it's rare to get rid of it. And she's fighting for her life. But these are indicative of what it means to live and to have the pain that becomes a part of our lives. And when Hagar went out into the desert, she cried. She didn't know what else to do. How well we can understand and how well we can sympathize for her pain, because for some of us, her pain is our pain as well. But then what happened? She saw a well, and she cried to God, who opened her eyes. And then she saw that well, and she took some water, and she gave some water to her son Ishmael, and the two of them went on and walked in joy. And the story now is almost over. But wait a minute. Listen to the rabbinic commentary from this 12th century rabbi, David Kimchi, known as the Radak. He writes, how does the Torah mean that God opened her eyes and she saw the well? It means that God gave her understanding and helped her to recognize the well, which had been there all the time. See, some people think that there was a miracle here, that God created a well and Hagar and Ishmael were able to survive, but the well was always there. And Kimchi teaches us perhaps the single most important lesson that we could possibly learn on this day or any day. The well was there, but Hagar could not see it. She couldn't see it because she was looking at the world only through her pain. And it was impossible for her to see the good that still existed in her life. How well we can identify with her, we who have been hurt in our lives, especially maybe for some during this past year. This is the issue on Rosh Hashanah Day. How do we look at the world? Through glasses which only see pain, like Hagar at first, or through glasses which, like existential bifocals, allow us to see also the glimmer of hope. Rabbi Harold Kushner, of blessed memory, who in his book, Who Needs God, says that religion is first and foremost a way of seeing the world. The well existed all the time. God did not make a miracle for Hagar as we usually understand that term. God did not create any life-giving resources that were not there before. God simply opened her eyes so that she might see the well that had already been there. Suddenly, the world that had looked so hopelessly cruel to her became livable and life-sustaining abode. The world was never really as bleak and a barren a place as it had seemed until God opened her eyes and led her to the well, and then she could see, up until then, only futility and suffering. Rabbi Kushner teaches that there are things which happen to everybody in the world, some good and some bad. What is important, he says, is to look at a glass which may be nearly empty like Hagar's, and to nevertheless believe that there are resources in the world and in our lives capable of filling it. The amazing thing was that in the afternoon, 4 o'clock on a Friday, there was somebody who could fill, not my tooth in this particular case, although that would have been a nice relationship with the dentist, but was able to fill the need to make this weekend not so miserable. Isn't that the point of Rosh Hashanah? To remind ourselves of that very thought, that there are possibilities for healing and recuperation and recovery and reconciliation in our lives. Each of us has those resources, and today we have to begin to treasure them. So I want to tell you a story. It's called Jewels, which I think has a personal impact for each of us. Once there was a merchant who dealt in precious stones. After a successful buying trip, he was ready to head home. At the train station, a man who recognized him offered to sell him additional diamonds. The merchant was shown the stones, but he resisted. He said, I've already purchased all the gems that I wish to buy, and I've got just enough money to be able to return home. But the diamonds that he was looking at were extraordinary. The price was reasonable, and the seller was persistent. And after reflection, the merchant said, Sir, I only have $200 left. If I travel by train third class, I can save some money. If I only eat bread, if I only drink plain water, if along the route I only sleep in alleyways, I can manage the entire trip for only $20. That is going to leave me with $180. Will you accept my $180 for those gems? And the seller accepted the agreement, and the sale was made. The merchant placed the diamonds in a leather container which he tied around his body, and he left for home. At one of the stations, he was recognized by a rich merchant, and he said to him, What happened to you? You're so wealthy. Usually you travel in luxury. You eat the best foods. You sleep in the best rooms. And now you're spending your night like a beggar in alleyways? Did you lose your fortune? The merchant told him the entire story and admitted that the ordeal, going home this way, really was difficult. And then he said, but every time I feel the pain of hunger gnawing at my stomach, every time my back aches from sleeping on the hard ground, every time a chill comes to my bones and makes me very cold, every time I am overcome with these terrible feelings, you know what I do? I go off to the corner and I take out my little pouch and I count my jewels, and all of my suffering leaves me. Each of us has a pouch of jewels. It's not around our neck, but it's in our lives. Our family, our friends, our synagogue, ourselves, our God. These jewels sustain us when we are in danger of giving up, almost as Hagar did. And so what I want to suggest is this. Rabbis have been on a chat with each other, talking about what did you learn from when you took seminary courses on how to write sermons. What did you learn that you had to do to give an effective sermon? And almost everybody said you need the sockdologer. What is a sockdologer? It's the point of the sermon that makes people have to do something. Don't just leave people with empty words without instruction as to how to take those words and to apply them to our lives. So here is my sockdologer for you. When you go home today, around the lunch table, around your Shabbat and Yom Tov table, whom are the jewels in your lives? Share some of this information around the table. Who gives you strength when sadness enters your life? To whom do you turn when you can't stand the way things are going? Who gives you hope in a world where we sometimes wonder if there is any reason left to hope? If they are there at your lunch table this afternoon, thank them. Maybe give them a hug. If they're not there, try to communicate in some way your feelings. Call them up or send them an email. Wait until after the holiday if you need to, but get in touch with them and let them know that they meant something in your life and that you appreciate them and what they've done for you. What a wonderful way to begin a new year, saying thank you to those who sustain and nurture us with their love and their caring. In my wisdom classes with high school students, we study this sentence from the book of Proverbs, from Mishlei. It says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. And so I would ask the seniors, what good do we withhold from people? And eventually they say, amongst other really, really lovely sentiments, they say, well, sometimes we withhold gratitude and appreciation. So at that class, I suddenly produce stationery and envelopes. And I say, is there anybody in school right now that you can think of that could use your words of appreciation and thanks? And they all start to think. The secretary who greets them so warmly when they go into the office, the person who helps them as a custodian, the guards who greet them with the smile, the teacher who inspires them, the fellow student who is always there for them. They can all think of somebody, and I would tell them, you need to write them right now a letter. And you need, before you leave school today, to give it to them. So they all get to thinking and then to writing. And that's exactly what they do. They write letters and they put them in the envelopes, and I remind them, it's got to be delivered today, right before you leave school. And they do that. The next day, people who have received these letters, the first line of which is, You're probably wondering why I'm sending you this letter, but my teacher in my wisdom class said that this is the way in which we can show our appreciation. So everybody knows I was the one who inspired them to do this. And so now they will come to me, teachers with tears in their eyes, custodians who grab me and hug me, people who say, I am dying to hear that my students appreciate me and what I've been teaching. It makes me so good to feel that I'm having an effect upon kids' lives, even if I'm just the security here. I want to make sure that they realize that I care for them, and now I know they do. People are touched by receiving these notes. There was and by the way, when the kids come back the next day and I say, how did it go? And they will tell me, well, the people I gave the letters to, they were really pleased. Some of them even sent me an email and they said, I keep rereading it and it was so lovely. Thank you so much. And then I tell them about a man who was going to commit suicide. And before he was going to take his life, he wanted to send a note, a thank you note, to the people who made a difference in his life. And he begins to write thank you notes. And as he's writing all of these thank you notes, a transformation takes place. And he begins to feel differently. And by the time he writes the last thank you note, he says, I feel so good, I don't feel like taking my life anymore. And he spent the rest of his very long life making sure that on a regular basis he sent thank you notes to people. And I asked the kids, all right, so you made somebody else feel good. How did it make you feel? And they would think a bit, and they would say, I really did feel good. I said, hold on to that, because you may not get a thank you note in return. You may not have somebody say, thank you for giving me that letter. It doesn't mean the effect didn't happen. What you need to do is do this so that not only have you made somebody else feel good, but it will make you feel good too. And I think maybe that's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. And that's what this Torah portion is all about. To discover, or perhaps to rediscover, the jewels in our lives, to cherish them, to make sure they know how brightly they shine in our lives, how important they are to us, how much we treasure them. May those jewels help us to open our eyes to discover a new sense of joy and contentment, so that we will find blessing in the year to come. And remember, the second part of the Sockdologer is that if we have those jewels in our lives, we can be jewels in other people's lives as well. It's not always easy. Sometimes friendship takes some aggravation. Sometimes people don't want our help, even if they need it. But remember that the book of Proverbs just doesn't tell us to withhold good for others, but also when it is in our power, we need to give it to others. Find people to thank. Find people to be their jewels. And maybe start this Rosh Hashanah. We continue our service with Chatzi Kaddish, and you can follow along on page 214. Please rise.
Excuse me. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברו חיותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה